This year has been a rough ride for me so far. I got out of a 3-year relationship last September, and work has been very hard to focus on. Before anyone suggests this, I am talking to someone, a professional. After a lot of weed use, many talks with my counsellor, and some more legitimate medication, this summer was supposed to be my time to start pulling myself out of the hole. So I rented this house. New place, new life, new me, you know. It was a nice enough place. 1,000 square feet, 1 bed, and 1.5 baths. It even had a lawn that I could see myself mowing throughout the summer months. The landlord gave me a tour before the lease was signed and finalised. The bathroom was a little small, but I wasn't looking for a lot of open space. I just wanted my little piece of the world, and this seemed like it could be it, at least for the 12-month-long leasing agreement. There was only one weird thing about my meagre home-to-be. I wanted to ask more questions when it came up during the tour, but I really didn't want to scrutinise a good thing. I'm afraid I made a large mistake. Murray MacDonald was a bigger, middle-aged man with a round face but weathered hands that he tucked into the back pockets of his jeans each time our tour took a little pause for me to survey the rooms. Our conversation through most of the half an hour or so I was there that day was little more than my eager questions being met with grunts to the affirmative or negative serving as answers. Each time we came to a new spot to inspect, Murray would turn to me, hands in his back pockets, and raise his dark eyebrows, etching several furrows in his forehead as he did so. It was a tired look that let me know just how happy the man was to be answering my questions. But I asked nonetheless. I have a questioning nature. My ex said so anyway. This process was played out in the living room, the bedroom, and both bathrooms. It was simple enough. Nothing was out of the ordinary, and I was feeling excited to move in. Then we came to the kitchen, and Murray's demeanour changed entirely. As he walked in, he moved quickly past me, down the narrow lane between the stove and the sink, and leaned his back against the wall on the far side of the room. It was the fastest I had ever seen him move since the tour began. I'll be honest and tell you it spooked me a little bit, but I shook it off, reaching for the thrilled feeling I'd been reveling in. The kitchen was definitely workable. It wasn't built for a team to cook in or anything, but once again, it would just be me. Everything was as clean as could be expected, and all the fixtures seemed to be in order. Satisfied, I turned with a smile to look at Murray, still leaning against the far wall. He wasn't looking at me. There were no raised eyebrows or lines of annoyance on his face. His eyes were wide and staring down at the tiled floor of the kitchen. His arms were crossed over his chest, and I spied a thin line of sweat running down his temple. The change from weary landlord to this alarmed state he seemed to be in now froze me where I stood. I stayed still and quiet for a moment that stretched over the interior of the little house like mist settling over the world. The moment passed, and I swallowed with a little effort and spoke at last. "Murray?" He jumped at the sound, his eyes wide, locking with mine. The intensity in that stare made me stumble back a bit. At that, Murray seemed to remember why we were here, shook his head a little, and stood up a little straighter before he spoke. "Sorry about that," he grumbled amicably. "Lost in thought for a minute there, I guess." "No worries," I laughed shakily. "Happens to me all the time." Not terribly convinced, I was ready to head out and leave this strange man to get lost in whatever thoughts he wanted to. I just wanted to get everything for the house settled and move forward. "Well, this all looks perfect," I said with a thin smile. "Anything else I should know about the place before I get moved in?" At this, Murray's face dropped a little. He took off his well-worn baseball cap and ran a hand through a thinning patch of dark hair beneath. Returning his gaze to me, Murray stepped away from the wall for the first time since we entered the kitchen, and I could finally see that it wasn't a wall he was standing in front of. It was a door. There wasn't anything special about its appearance. It was a simple white door. The doors in the rest of the house looked exactly the same as this one. In my mind, I thought this meant I had more closet space than I thought, or maybe even a full pantry. Feeling some of the excitement I'd carried with me through the beginning of the tour, I turned back to Murray, who was watching me closely from beside the door. Then, he spoke in a calm, friendly voice, very unlike the tone he'd favoured during the rest of our short conversations. Well, technically there's one more room in the house. The basement, he said with a small nod to the door he had been leaning against. Before I could respond or react, Murray barreled on. But I've been using the space as storage for a lot of my own crap through the years. The door stays locked, and the only key is mine. I hope you aren't offended, but I just don't want you messing around down there in all the old junk. I haven't kept it organized, and I worry someone else might stumble and hurt themselves. You understand? It seemed like a reasonable explanation, but my lizard brain was abuzz with the instinct to run from the house. Thoughts of crazy landlords keeping their tenants as slaves in their secret basement dungeons played out in my mind. My poker face being terrible, Murray must have seen the worry on my face. With a convincing laugh, he put his hands up in the air like he was surrendering himself. I know what you're thinking. Who is this guy, and what awful thing is going on in his basement that he doesn't want me to know about? We both laughed a little. I didn't feel much like laughing, but it got the tension a bit. He continued on. I swear, it's nothing like that. We can take a look if you want. He took his keys out of his back pocket and selected the necessary key. Again, he looked at me with raised eyebrows and a furrowed brow, waiting for a response. After a second of hesitation and a few more murder scenarios playing in my brain, I blinked and answered the man. Why not? The basement was very much just a basement. A concrete floor with shelves and boxes galore. Murray hadn't lied about the abundance of junk down there. He had to climb over several piles of it to reach the solitary light bulb that hung from the ceiling at the center of the room. Satisfied, I told Murray we could head back up. Back in the kitchen, Murray closed and locked the door once again, returning his keys to his pocket. Turning to me, he spoke again with nonchalance and dismissal. See, nothing crazy at all. Just a lot of junk someone could trip over. So do me a favor, huh? Don't worry about getting in there. Not without me. Looking to end what was starting to feel like a very strange encounter, I nodded quickly. This apparently wouldn't suffice. Murray spoke again, with harshness in his voice. I need you to say it. You will not try to go down there without me. You will leave it be. I stared at him for a moment, not exactly trying to hide the puzzlement on my face. He raised his eyebrows at me again, but the tiredness in his eyes had been replaced with clear focus now. My blood turning to ice in that gaze, I eagerly answered, Of course, I'll stay in my areas up here. I promise not to mess with the basement at all without you here. Murray held his cold gaze on me for another swollen moment before apparently deciding that my answer was acceptable. The tour was completed, and I hastily left the house, trying to focus on how good it would be to have my own place and a fresh start. All the while, That icy stare the older man had held me in made me jittery the entire drive home. Later that week, the papers were finalised and I had my keys. Gathering up some friends, I got moved in with relative ease, and all was right with the world. My buddies stayed over for a while once we were done to enjoy a well-deserved feast of pizza and beer. It was such a relief to just hang out and be happy in my new home, filling it up with warmth and light. As it got later, my friends began to head home one by one. When the last one had left, I locked the front door, turned, and rested my back against it. I looked up at the house and smiled wide. This is gonna be good, I said out loud to myself and the house. I turned towards my bedroom to hit the hay myself. 3 loud knocks came from somewhere in the house. Knock, knock, knock. Frozen in place, I perked my ears, half convinced I had imagined the sound. The silence stretched out forever, and a quiet ringing boomed in my ears. I let out my breath, trying to replace my sense of calm with oxygen. I began to move towards my room again. Knock, knock, knock. I whipped around. My heartbeat hammered in my ears like an echo of the knocking sound. This time, it was clear where the noise was coming from. The kitchen. Painfully aware of each sound I made, I inched my way back down the hall, through the living room and into the kitchen. I flipped the light switch and was greeted by that ominous white door on the far side of the room. It was sitting there, waiting for me, like it had invited me in for some coffee. In that moment, I couldn't make my feet move forward anymore, and I just stared at the door, waiting for another knocking noise to come and my sanity to go. I counted the seconds, then the minutes. 5 minutes went by with me standing stock still in my own kitchen, staring at the locked basement door. After 10 minutes, I was convinced I had a few too many and was content to end the night with a few more and a night of drunken sleep. Laughing a little, I reached in the fridge and grabbed a couple more beers. I walked back to the kitchen entrance and looked back at the basement door. It still looked like it was waiting for me there. I shook the thought off and flipped the light switch off. A thin, yellow light was leaking through the crack at the bottom of the basement door. I stared at it. There was no way it was real. Or maybe Murray had left the light on, but I hadn't seen the light before I hit the kitchen light switch walking in. It couldn't have been real. That's what I kept thinking. Reaching up, I hit the kitchen light switch again, and there was the basement door, stark white and almost smiling at me. Did you see? Are you sure you saw what you saw? Come a little closer, take another look. My hand was shaking on the light switch now, and I could feel my eyes bulging in their sockets. Slowly, I took a deep breath and let it out with a shudder. I would turn the lights off and there would be nothing. It was fine. I was fine. With a click, the kitchen lights went dark once more. What I saw then sent me scrambling back down the hall into my room, and I did not leave until the sun had returned the following morning. The yellow light still seeped out from under the door, broken by the unmistakable shadow of 2 feet. Knock, knock, knock.